Welcome to Black Nouveau. This is a special edition for November 16th, 2016. I'm Joanne Williams. Much of our program this week is an extended interview with former Milwaukee police officer Carrie Flowers. In the first of a two-part conversation, he talks with James Causey about his 25 years of service on the force. We begin, though, with MPower, a local theater group that wants to do more than entertain you. Jay Winters has that story.
There are two problems with black women. The first is their propensity for demanding and demeaning. That I am a queen-like attitude that makes them look anything but queenly. And second is their flat refusal to own that first problem. It's so deep in you, you can't even see.
This production of UnTamed was presented at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee recently. It was directed by Katina Cole, creator of MPower. MPower stands for Milwaukee Power and the empowerment of people.
That are important to all of us, to provide awareness, to provide advocacy, to start some communication. The great thing about Milwaukee is that it's a lot of community theater here. You could find actors, you could find producers, you could find playwrights here, and it's a thriving art scene. What we found was missing, though, was a lot of plays that worked with social justice issues or in primarily African-American people. Hair the way.
While performing in UWM's production of The Vagina Monologues, Katina realized she could change that.
In the past, they jokingly referred to you're the black girl that's in the Vagina Monologues. And one of my goals was when I directed was to bring more diversity. And as a result of directing the Vagina Monologues, someone in the African-American community asked me to do an African-American version of it. And that kind of set the trajectory to, okay, I guess I have to do this now.
They were like trying to drag me out, and I'm still screaming.
I heard her scream. You know that scream, your child scream, that sends chills down the back of your neck, because you know that ain't no scream for play?
Initially, the focus was trauma survivors. I'm a trauma survivor. Many of the people involved were trauma survivors, and they came out as trauma survivors in telling stories. But what we found out was that we all deal with trauma, and particularly in our community, different ways. So some of the topics that we addressed was people coming out for the first time. We have dealt with police brutality. We have delved into molestation in families. We have dealt with rape. We've dealt with women needing an orgasm. I'm not sure if I could say that. We've dealt with any issues people face that they're sometimes afraid to say out loud.
This uniform means that I have the right to use my judgment within the limitations of the law to best serve and protect the communities I police.
Deal with it, eh? You think that your fake hair, fake body...
UnTamed is a collection of 5 short plays that raises issues facing African American women. Katina hopes that the stories will enlighten, spark dialogue, and not just preach to the choir.
No, definitely not. It's just to give a voice.
Waved, whistled, 5 cabs passed right by me. I called dispatch 8 times. Nothing.
Believe me, I know the feeling.
Unfortunately, the issues that we have dealt with, some of the plays were written 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And it's always interesting to me that by the time we go to stage with something, it always seems to be a topic still fresh in the news.
Good morning, America approached us, but our attorney said it might damage the case. If they saw her body, it wouldn't help. I think he was right. 5 foot, 125 pounds, curves. It shouldn't have mattered, she was 12.
Families are broken. Families are broken. If families are broken, the community is broken. If community is broken, then people are broken. So, we really don't talk about these things until they're in the media. But we don't talk about it like on one-on-one basis or in a group setting. And MPower provides that avenue where a person can feel comfortable with opening and beginning to start that dialogue.
All of these plays really resonated with me in different ways, and I was just wondering, how were you guys able to separate your own emotion?
Before rehearsal, we always check in, because again, we are talking about very emotional and very, legit conversations. So we always check in to make sure, okay, what's your high, what's your low?
So the hardest part for me is like the end of the play when Destiny's giving this like passionate speech, and personally, I start relating to that, but I try to trigger back into my character with like these, these hateful kinds of thoughts. So it's definitely like some kind of balance that like you're striking as an actor, but.
MPower Productions raise money for community organizations. Katina wants more local playwrights to bring their stories to the stage.
We've had many cast from 5 people to 20 people that have been involved on the stage. I will hope that we could build more people and volunteers behind the stage. And in particular, with Milwaukee and the demographic, we need to have spaces that everyone feels safe, not just the African American community, but everybody feels safe in having a voice. So I see MPower continuing to foster that relationship and that communication and that talking. And as long as I'm here, I'm still having something to do with it.
To find out more about MPower Theater's upcoming events, go to empowertheater.com.
After a quarter century of service, Carrie Flowers retired from the Milwaukee Police Department in 2015.
I was in law enforcement for 25 years. I spent my first 9 years as a patrolman and my last 16 years as a police supervisor.
What districts were you in?
Oh, I was in most every district, 1 through 7, on a variety of shifts. Plus, I was in patrol support and assigned to the Tactical Enforcement Unit, which is one would be commonly referred to it as a SWAT team. I was out at the academy. I even supervised down at the jail, the Prisoner Processing Center, formerly known as LUCAD. So I've had a pretty good slice of law enforcement in my 25 years.
Now, was becoming a police officer your first choice?
Oh, no, it wasn't even a second or a third choice. I've always been civic-minded from the individuals that I kind of grew up around, the Ben Johnsons, the Michael McGee's of our community back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I chose to further my civic-mindedness by joining the military. And I spent quite a few years in the military, and once I got out on active duty, it was just seemed like it was a natural progression that one would normally take to go into law enforcement coming from the military because of the structure that I left. I think I needed or wanted that additional structure that I thought the law enforcement would provide in most cases, but I didn't want that. I didn't want that, and I looked at every other option before law enforcement was kind of dumped in my lap. And I tell people the story is somewhat cliche and it's a little bit satirical, is that I got into law enforcement because of the 3 bears. I didn't want to be bare back, bare ass, or bare feet, you know. I had a family. I was a young man with a young family, wife and child, and I needed to provide for them. And law enforcement gave me that.
Have you ever had to fire your weapon?
Yes, I have, unfortunately. Well, most law enforcement people don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. They rather resolve things with processes that they have and use their intellect to resolve conflict. Most law enforcers utilize their service weapon as a last resort. Sometimes, like when I was on the Tactical Enforcement Unit, it may have had to be the first result or the first option because of the situation. But most of the times, that's something you really don't want to do because there's a burden that comes along with firing that weapon, especially if you take someone's life.
What was that experience like? How did you feel? What went through your head?
Well, each time I looked at it as almost like a business decision, because it was a part of my job. I had to take emotion out of it and look at it from an analytical perspective. Okay, this person is doing this. One of the ways to stop this person from doing this is to do that. And that is to discharge my service weapon or a rifle or handgun, whatever it may be. And you have to be very cautious about what you're doing, because it does have some repercussions.
That brings up an interesting question then. Well, who becomes police officers?
People with good intentions. People that want to see our democracy upheld. Sometimes those individuals have good intentions, but they go astray. They get misguided and may not always do things the right way each and every time. We understand, especially when I got into supervision, we understand that people, law enforcement officers, tend to want to do things the right way, but sometimes mistakes happen. We in supervision have to be able to understand that they do happen, and how can we correct this without the individual victim being harmed even further? Because there is going to be some harm, whether it's emotional harm or physical harm. Yeah.
Well, we often hear that this may be a training issue or something like that. What kind of training do officers receive?
Outside of most officers having advanced degrees in their field, such as criminal justice or police science or some type of law enforcement curriculum that gets them in the practice of doing certain procedures, police-related procedures, plus there are other academic curriculum like writing. There's a lot of writing involved in law enforcement. It's not like what you see on television. I had to learn a valuable lesson once when I was a young supervisor, and I had a number of investigations, internal investigations, citizens' complaints against police officers. And as I got these complaints, I started thinking, why are they doing this? Why are they doing the stuff that I would think is unconventional? Until I saw an episode of T.J. Hooker. It may seem somewhat funny, but the officers that were involved in these complaints were doing things that I saw on television, and I had to go back and re-educate these officers in that, that's television, and I would mention it many times in roll call as I did roll call. But getting back to your question, the training that they go through outside of their advanced degrees, they have in-services that should be conducted on a regular basis by their agency. Milwaukee Police Department has a series of in-services that go on throughout the year. The Sheriff Department, the same, and most other agency that I know of has some sort of in-service where they bring up issues of training, whether it be how to fire your firearm, crime, investigative techniques, or things like juvenile law. So there is and should be continuous training for the law enforcer throughout their career.
When can an officer use force? I mean, we hear about this all the time, and we see scenes where officers discharge their weapons a lot.
Yes.
When can an officer use force, or when is it appropriate?
An officer, unlike most of the public, is privileged to use force when they need to gain compliance of a resistor, someone who is resisting their direction, whether that be physical force. Usually it's through voice projection, me telling you to do something.
Or
Stop.
yelling at
Raising your voice, voice inflection, to hands-on techniques, compliance holds, baton strikes, or ultimately discharging your service weapon, and possibly creating a deadly force type situation. Most of the public understands that at one point an officer is going to use force. They understand that. But I think where it gets a little bit cloudy is how much force they should use.
Right.
And then you get into the excessive force or unreasonable force or even police brutality. There never should be an instance of police brutality. Force, we can understand. Brutal behavior cannot be accepted.
All right. Should officers live in the communities that they serve?
I think it's a good idea, and I've always been a proponent of law enforcement people coming from the community that they serve. It helps. One, the officer is familiar with the culture that exists within the community that they're serving. Two, they have a vested interest in seeing it be successful because that's where they live, that's where they're raising their family, that's where they want productivity to occur. In my career, most law enforcers, especially black law enforcers, were very critical of the position of law enforcer as it pertained to their legacy. They wanted others in the community to follow their footsteps, and they wanted to covet those jobs so that they were there when young people from the community wanted to raise their families and have these family supporting jobs with these family supporting securities like wages and benefits.
Mm-hmm. Racial profiling is one of those tough issues. Mm-hmm. Does racial profiling exist?
Yes, it does. Yes, unfortunately, it does. And
what does that look like and feel like? What happens?
Racial profiling, as the victim of racial profiling, doesn't feel good at all.
How does an officer use that to stop a suspect? What happens?
Well, officers get information, sometimes through firsthand knowledge, sometimes through another source regarding a subject involved in a particular incident. And they use that information to weed out those that are not involved. For example, if you just had a situation where the subject was black male, 16 to 25, 5'8" to 6 foot, slim built, that could be tons of people.
Right.
It may be appropriate, but in the wrong hands with the wrong ideology, it becomes hurtful and it becomes a part of misconduct.
Now, okay, so what can a person do if they're racially profiled, or what should they do?
If you feel that you have been racially profiled, first thing you want to do is find out from the individual that's stopping you, what was the nature of the stop? Why are you stopping me? Because you want them to be able to articulate why they stopped you, because if you feel that it was inappropriate, you want to have, when an investigator gets it, the officer's response, because they're going to ask you why. Mm-hmm. Did they stop you? Do you know why they stopped you? And once you find that out, you want to get the officer's name and any particular information that you might be able to give to the investigator so that they can locate this individual that stopped you. Because sometimes you won't have a name, the officer won't give you, which in most municipalities, the officer is required to give you their name upon request. You won't have a badge number. It might be an officer from another municipality operating in the municipality that you live in. We have a lot of borderline cities in the city of Milwaukee, so you could be traveling from one municipality into another, mm-hmm. and that officer from that previous municipality wishes to stop you for some violation or for some particular purpose, and they don't stop you until you get into your city or another city, you want to gather as much information that you can to be able to identify the individual that you feel treated you inappropriately.
Okay, so I'm driving. I get stopped by the police. I say, what did I do wrong? I don't know what I did wrong. Tell me, what should I do? Should I keep my hands on the wheel all the time while I'm having this conversation with the officer? Should I have my identification already ready so I could avoid anything bad happening to me during the stop? Take me through that process.
I would tell anybody. I hear all these stories about put your hands on your head, stand on one foot, turn around, do the hokey pokey. I don't believe in all that. I think you should be courteous and patient. Those are the two things that I think are most important. If you're courteous with the officer, no matter where you have your hands, the officer is going to feel less of anxiety. They won't be as anxious, okay, when they're dealing with you. Maybe the awareness might not go down, but their interaction with you won't be as stressful. And they'll be able to give you direction on what they want you to do. Don't automatically assume that you're supposed to have your wallet out or hands on the steering wheel, stuff like that. Let the officer give you direction on what they want you to do. The better you follow directions, the better the traffic stop or the field interview, which is them stopping you on foot on the street, will go. And the more courteous you are, hopefully they're courteous in their stop, utilizing professional communication, the easier the interaction will be. And be patient with the officer. I tell officers this all the time. Be patient with the people you're dealing with. They don't know really what you have on your mind when you stop them. You may stop them for one thing, but be thinking something else that's police-related, non-misconduct. And if you're courteous and patient, most of the time, traffic stops or field interview or contacts with the police will go smoothly. In certain instances, they don't. So the public has to have a mechanism to be able to report that to someone so that conduct doesn't continue.
What's that process?
That process is most of the time an agency has a formal citizen complaint. It's generally in a written form. If you find out that the agency doesn't have a written form complaint, they probably need to correct that policy or behavior. Because even though you complain about an officer's conduct or even a department member's conduct, there needs to be a written record of that. Because if it continues, the agency will be better able to correct that behavior.
So you go to your district, where do you go?
For different agencies, there's a different process. With the Milwaukee Police Department, there's 3 different processes that you can use. You can go down to City Hall and speak with an individual down at the City Hall with the Fire and Police Commission. You can go to your local police district if you can find it. If you're out of towner, you could call the non-emergency number, the 933-4444 number, and ask about the citizen complaint process. Or you can go, if you're versatile and you have knowledge over the process already, you can go to the Safety Academy and speak to someone in Internal Affairs.
Okay.
And those individuals will help you guide yourself through the complaint process. There are other nonprofit organizations that are out there that have knowledge over the citizen complaint process, and they will help you also.
Have you ever been racially profiled?
Yes, I believe I have.
You believe or you know?
I know I was racially profiled, yes.
And we'll talk about that next week as we continue our conversation.
Next week, we'll feature Black Arts MKE's production of Black Nativity. Here's a preview.
Sweet little Jesus boy, born in a manger. Sweet little holy child, we didn't know seems like we can't do right. Look how.
And before we close, a reminder that 1036, our new news magazine, premieres this Friday at 7:30 on Channel 10. One of the segments looks at why anybody would want to be a police officer. And that's our program for this week. For Black Nouveau, I'm Joanne Williams. Thanks for watching.